Welcome to Real Time Recorded, our weekly series on enterprise communications. I'm Zeus Caraval from ZK Research, and as always, I'm here with Dave Michaels from Talking Points. This is week 41 of 2020, and Dave, this seems like the longest year, but the shortest year. It's every week we've got a whole bunch of different conferences.
Well, the difference is that we're attending multiple conferences in the same week as opposed to just one a week.
Yeah, before you had to pick and choose, I guess. So this week was no difference. We had a lot of events. Maybe the biggest one was NVIDIA's GPU Technology Conference, known as GTC. Now, this is an event that may not be familiar to the communications audience. It's typically been a hardcore developer event focused on stuff you can do with the GPU, like AI. Now, it just so happens they did announce something that's going to be relevant to the collaboration space. And this is something that's called Maxine. It is a set of AI services for collaboration that's streamed from the cloud. So they've partnered with Amazon, GCP, Azure, Oracle, and Tencent, I think. And so these features are made not as part of the platform, but as a set of streaming AI services. And there are things like, one of the cooler features is something called facial alignment. And so if I'm looking over here like this and the camera's over here, it'll actually realign my face automatically. So I'm always looking at the camera so we can maintain eye contact. It's also got facial recognition capabilities. It's got noise reduction, speech, virtual backgrounds, things like that. Now, you may say, well, some of the vendors already have those capabilities, and that's true. But some of the vendors are limited, right? So with the Cisco Desk Pro, they have those capabilities. They're built into the device. With Zoom, it runs on the client. And so, for instance, with Zoom's virtual background, if you're using a low-end device like a MacBook Pro, which is actually hardly a low-end device, but if you're using a device like that, you can't run virtual backgrounds. This democratizes AI capabilities. You can run them on any device, including mobile phones. I think it's a very creative way to do it. Obviously, it uses NVIDIA GPUs. On the day of the announcement, Avaya announced they're going to be bringing Maxine capabilities to Spaces, which I think is pretty cool. And I suspect Zoom will be as well, because Jensen's going to be part of the Zoomtopia keynote, which we'll report on next week.
That's a good guess.
Thoughts on this too. So,
processors or semiconductors are not something that I normally cover, but NVIDIA has been kind of slowly working its way into my coverage indirectly. I think it was Cisco that started putting it into their room systems at first, and then I even had a NVIDIA section in my last newsletter about their merger with ARM and why that's significant. And clearly NVIDIA is kind of displacing Intel at the mega processor. I mean, they're in every mobile device. If they merge with ARM, they're in every mobile device, and now with all this AI technology, I think that it's really important what you're talking about, because AI has so many use cases in our meetings, conferences, and Avaya is jumping right on, and probably Zoom is too. But you've talked about a few of them. But it could upscale the quality of a video from a low res to a higher quality. It could enable tracking software if you want to move around and have it follow you. Obviously, lots of sound improvements it gets used for. Those GPUs get used for translation capabilities. Or even improved compression if you're in a narrow bandwidth situation. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for NVIDIA to continue to be an important part of our enterprise communications coverage. So another conference happened this week. It's Slack Frontiers, and they had a number of announcements. They actually put on a pretty good show. I was really impressed with their keynotes, and I was really impressed with Sarah Cooper as a guest celebrity presenting there. And just the right mix of comedy and nerd humor came together really nicely. So a couple big announcements there were actually about voice. Actually, believe it or not, they've got two real-time kind of technologies. One of them's real-time. One of them's called video stories, and it's not like Snapchat stories; they disappear. But it's really more like voicemail, video voicemail. And I love it how these technologies keep on coming and going. But yeah, we all have cameras at our desk. We all have microphones, and we're engaging in, right now, text and Slack. And so why not send somebody a quick little update video message? So video stories is quick and easy, and they don't disappear. So that's one point. The other thing that they're testing is anytime audio, which is actually not asynchronous, but synchronous audio. It's basically a voice channel right into one of the Slack channels. And it basically allows you to, it's basically an intercom. I mean, you could kind of mute it, and then when you want to say something, you just turn it on and you start talking, and you get out to all your team members. I have mixed feelings about that one. I'm not sure how well that's going to play, but we'll see how it does. That's why it's in a pilot mode. I think the most significant news out of Frontiers, though, is their ongoing commitment to Slack Connect, which they launched last year. And you know, that is positioned basically as an email replacement. We know that when organizations implement Slack, that they have a big drop off in email internally, but email remains the primary mechanism for external interactions. And so they're really, with Slack Connect, they're allowing you to really beef that up. It's been a channel-based solution, and now they're announcing a DM, a direct messaging capability. And I think that's really nice. And they've even gone further with the Slack Connect with something they're calling managed connections. And managed connections allows you to set up different policies between organizations. And so what the security policies are, if users could upload files or not, various permissions, various usage parameters. And I think that's really interesting because that actually makes Slack Connect more valuable and more strategic or more secure than, say, email, which you really can't control very easily. And so now this will stop things like phishing attacks, and it'll improve policy control over certain kinds of content. So I think it's a really interesting way that Slack is moving from an internal tool to an external tool.
Yeah, and in fact, I do think those things are important for Slack. You know, as I wrote in my in the Fuse Slack post on No Jitter a little while ago, which didn't happen, obviously. I think it's important that Slack do get into real time because all the real time vendors are getting into team collaboration. So to me, the gap between Slack and everybody else is closing. You know, the Webex's team collaboration is pretty good. So Zoom's, Microsoft Teams, obviously, and so that was a big piece that they were missing. I think the asynchronous stuff that the walkie-talkie type feature that you mentioned is interesting for teams. I've talked to some teams that actually they kind of sit on Zoom all day long, and if you want to get someone's attention, you just kind of go on and say, hey, can I get you for a minute or whatever like that. It's almost like you're sitting beside the person. So now we can virtually sit beside the person if you're working on a team. And so this lets you do it more kind of ad hoc, I guess. But I do think that the real time is important. And they've been really lagging in this. I've been waiting for this to do this. You know, Symphony, who's a really niche version of Slack for financial services, has been rolling this stuff out, including external connectivity. So if they're seeing the need, Slack certainly would have seen it. But I think dabbling in real time is important for Slack, and I'd like to see them take this further and see where they go, because I do think without some more of those features, they're going to have a hard time competing in the future. Another vendor that made announcements this week was Cisco, although they didn't have an event that corresponded with it, but they did talk a lot about updates to Webex. One of the maybe the overarching theme for Cisco is the hybrid workplace in trying to make the meeting experience 10x better, the virtual meeting 10x better than actually being there in person. And that may seem like a pretty bold statement, but I think through the use of AI technology, which we talked about before, reducing the number of clicks, having better controls, they can actually do that. And this is important because it does, not only from an experience perspective, but also from a workplace safety perspective, you want to reduce the number of clicks. You don't want to be touching panels that other people have touched. You don't want to be sitting too close to people. And so through the Webex experience, they're trying to make everything more voice activated, more automated. And that there's a lot of interesting implications around that. As part of that, they announced a bunch of IoT sensors. And actually, I've been waiting for the UC and IoT markets to come together. I actually wrote something on No Jitter a little while ago called UC IoT. And what they've released is a bunch of IoT devices that can do things like see how many people are in a conference room, measure the temperature of people in those conference room. They can even sense things like humidity and stuff like that. So they can actually tell whether people are using the workspace responsibly, provide reports. So line of business managers can then go ahead and tell people are violating those rules. And so, Dave, I know you had some thoughts on the IoT piece as well.
You know, on that IoT angle, one of the interesting things about that is they could detect the number of people in the room. They could do that even if there's not a conference taking place. And they announced the new Navigator, which is the panel. It's actually the tabletop display, but it could also be hung outside the room as a room panel. And what I really like about that is it shows if the room is green, available, or red, unavailable. But just by walking into the room, just a quick ad hoc conversation, just by walking into the room changes the status to red, which I think is just a phenomenal capability. I think that whole room panel sector is going to become very important. Microsoft just announced it on Teams that they're coming out with a new solution. Crestron has updated their solution. Neat is selling a bunch of them into the Zoom environment and actually beyond the Zoom environment with that Neat panel. So I think we're going to see an explosion really in this connected panels on outside the meeting rooms. And the final thing I want to cover in this episode is Google Workspace. Google kind of surprised a lot of us, rebranding G Suite to Google Workspace. It's a name change. It's an icon change. They're changing the pricing and packaging. And it's also a continuation of what they've been talking about for a while as they are blurring the boundaries between their applications. It's kind of similar to what Microsoft is doing with Fluid. But I think Google's a little bit ahead here. The idea of being able to do a video call within a dock. I think they're onto the right path here. It's desktop centric. It's web centric. No client still, which is I think a big difference between that with Microsoft.
I think to me the most notable point was the integration to email. I think every vendor needs to work from their area of strength, and I think Google has largely been a disappointment in the collaboration space. And I think part of that is because they've had all these parallel initiatives going on. If there's one app that's used by more people and more companies, it's Gmail. And so if they can tie everything to Gmail and launch the whole Google experience from Gmail, that at least gives them a very strong anchor application. So I'd expect to see more in this area. I'd like to see Google do more AI stuff with all the people using the Google apps, similar to what Microsoft's doing with the Graph. But I think by and large, the changes were good for Google. And like I said, the tie into email makes some sense.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Real Time Recorded. We'll be back next week, probably, I'm just guessing, probably talking about Zoomtopia, but you have to tune in next week to find out.